Happy Wednesday, everyone. Hi, Trax. Hi, Nevercom. Hi, everyone else who's here. Thanks for coming back. Hope you all had a great week. Um, yeah, I don't have any fun announcements or anything to talk about today, so I'm just going to move over to coding view and we can get started soon. I kind of have an idea what we're going to do, uh, but also not really. Um, I think it makes sense today to continue working on the login screen that we've been working on for like 3 or 4 weeks now. And in total, probably like 10 hours we've spent on it. Um, but I actually think it's, aside from a couple design tweaks I want to make, it's actually very close to what we want to do. Um, let's go over to the code base and we can talk about where everything sits in terms of login. So the UI portion is pretty much done. We've seen we have a login screen with inputs and buttons. And over the last few weeks, we've been working on the login view model. Um, and that, can I collapse this right? How do we do this? Uh, okay, that was kind of close. Um, we've got quite a bit done here already. So we've got like our login view state that we expose, and we have methods for like email changed and password changed and login button clicked. And this is actually where we spent a lot of our time last week, is we played around with the error scenarios of logging in. So, like, what happens if you have invalid credentials or some unknown error, or you have empty credentials, um, which are actually most of our possible login results. The only thing that we have yet to handle is the success case. If we look at login result here, like these are kind of our at high level everything we can do. So we handled all the error scenarios last week. The only thing we haven't yet done for our login screen is the success case. Now, I'm kind of debating whether we want to work on that today. Um, I think that would be cool, but it's also kind of hard to handle like a successful login if we don't yet have anything set up to happen after that. Like we don't have like a home screen, not even a stub for it or anything yet. Um, so actually what I really think we should do is we have not yet done any work to like hook up this login screen with the actual user interface. Um, right now we are only well, we're launching like the default main activity. Um, so I actually think what might be good for today is we explore like how do we actually create our login screen and have that show up uh, on the UI. And then that kind of goes down a rabbit hole of like, well, how do we, if we're creating the ViewModel, we got to talk a little bit about like dependency injection. And I think that's what I want to do today, is I want to set up the login ViewModel with the UI, um, and then, uh, sorry, I don't know if we'll do it today, but what I want to do after all that, I actually got a really good comment on a YouTube video. Someone wanted, uh, like a recap of the code so far, because we've been doing this for like 5 or 6 streams already. There's at least 8 videos of this app on YouTube, and someone wanted kind of a recap, and I think we could do that, but I think an even better way is I'd really love to sort of, not so much a recap, but document how this app is structured. We did like an architecture diagram a while ago, before we dove into the code, and I'd actually like to update that and maybe spend some time just documenting how the login screen works and how that's going to be kind of a framework for all of our screens moving forward. And I think that only makes sense to do, or rather, it's most helpful to do that after we've like connected the login screen to the UI, because I think there will be some standards there that we need to talk about. So I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know if that sounds like fun. I think that's what I want to do today. Let me know if there are objections. Otherwise, I think I will probably fill out these tasks in the same way. So let me rephrase this. UI. So I guess the way I look at this, I say hilt. I pop this up at the bottom left here. Um, yeah, I say hilt because many of you who are regulars know that I have like a hate relationship with hilt. But on the other hand, while building a tool that I hope people can learn from, I think that for certain things, it's good to lean on the Google recommendation, which is Hilt. Um, but as I spend more time with it, I start to get a little more familiar with it. So, uh, what do you mean by pure DI? Like building it ourselves? Because that's an approach that I've also found interesting. Um, that's how Compose happened for me. It is. But I actually think that yeah, the reason I like manual dependency injection too is that there's like I saw a really good talk from Sam Edwards on do-it-yourself dependency injection. He talked about like the ability to just go into a code base and click find usages on a dependency and see like where it's coming from is really cool. But with Hilt, you don't have that. It's just magic because of all the annotation processing. And magic's not a bad thing if you understand what's happening. But I think that's the argument is that like you don't understand it just by looking at it. You have to spend time like just learning how it works, and then the rest of the code base kind of makes sense. Um, but I think one of the reasons I kind of want to go with Hilt, actually, let me talk about this. So I asked a question on Twitter a while ago around scoping view models with Compose, and there was hey Ned, how are you doing? Um, Someone pointed out Hilt, like that if you use Hilts with navigation compose, that you have this helpful like Hilt view model, which like creates a view model from the current backstack entry. And I can see you can't read that, not now. Um, there's some stuff with Hilt and compose that I think would be really helpful, and so maybe it'd be beneficial to kind of buy into Hilt in the first place. Um, So that's kind of my thought process. So let's go in that direction. Before we do, um, I want to stick with the organization here. So actually, let's write out some issues for what we want to work on today because I don't think I have a ton of these in here. So say add Hilt integration, um, and I want to add the docs here. So those are the Hilt compose docs, but somewhere is so I want this. Inject view model objects with Hilt. Maybe. Let me find the Hilt Android docs. Even with no Hilt, you can do it. Yeah. I mean, anything Hilt can do, we can do ourselves. Um, it's just a matter of, I guess, well, do we want to, right? I guess this is technically like developer experience. Um, but when we do it, we're going to do it for the login screen first. Um, it's also, yeah, that's a good point. Um, there's new issue. What else are we going to work on today? We're going to, well, what I want to do, more specifically, I want to move login screen into main activity. I don't think we'll talk a ton about compose navigation here, but just here, I'm actually going to say it. Don't worry about navigation. Just have the activity launch the login screen so we can test it. Yeah, that's kind of my thought as uh it helps. This is an excuse for me to practice that library. And then I'm also going to put document app architecture. So once the login screen is completed, or at least the sign-in flow, let's document the app architecture so that newcomers can easily get up to speed faster. Okay, and that will go in our developer experience project. Okay, so those 3 issues that we made are what we're going to work on today. And let's start with the Hilt integration. So this is issue number 49. So what I'm going to do is go over here. Was it through here? Or maybe I want them to get, how did I do this in the past? Why can't I find it? How does, I forgot how the UI works, because I always do this. I do plan to try the Compose Destinations library when we get to it, but I don't think that will come up tonight. Okay, so we're going to work on Hilt integration. So I'll talk through this slowly, not necessarily to help everyone, but because I need to talk through it slowly. But let's start with the obvious stuff. We need to add all of our dependencies. So first we need the Hilt Android Gradle plugin. Let's throw that in, build a Gradle file. And yeah, let's actually pull this out real quick. Hilt version. Let's get that emulator out of the way. Sorry about that. So we're adding the Gradle plugin here. I've talked in the past, I like to split up version numbers up here. I also like to put in the release notes, so it's easy to find where updates are when they happen. So let's figure out where the Hilt releases page is. Here we go. So we're just going to take this link to the Hilt release changelog and drop that in our Gradle file here. Oops, sorry. Just have to keep an eye out on my messages right now. Cool. And after we add the Gradle plugin, I think we need to add the app dependencies. So we have the Hilt library, but we also need the annotation processing, and then make sure we apply the plugin. So let's do all of that. We're going to copy and paste our favorite things as developers. Go into here. And also, because I pulled that out, let's replace that hard-coded version with our what is it? Our variable. Oh, and then we need to make sure we add this plugin. So let's do that. That happens up here. And let's do a Gradle sync, and hopefully I set everything up correctly. Now, Hilt, for anyone unfamiliar with it, or unfamiliar with dependency injection in general, so let's start by explaining like dependency injection in general. So it's a complicated word that I think captures a really, whoops. Okay, we have an issue with that Gradle sync. Oh, could not find capped. The reason for that is because we also need to make sure we have the Kotlin capped plugin. So let's try that again. So dependency injection is, yep, that was a great catch, Raphael. Dependency injection is a complicated word for something that I think we all know. Like, I saw someone on Twitter really break it down as like, why do they call it dependency injection when what they really mean is passing things into the constructor? And so that's the way I like to present it to people. When we talk about dependency injection, what we mean in this example is, okay, our login view model needs a credentials login use case. This is a dependency. This means that our view model cannot work if it does not have this use case. So like that's the dependency, right? In the injection part as well, how do I give that dependency into the view model? And so typically out of the box, we see this when we like create a view model factory. And then we, when we create the view model, when we call the constructor, we're supplying all these arguments. And I think what the dependency injection libraries try to do is they try to eliminate all of that boilerplate. And like Hilt does that through like or through annotation processing. So like an example would be, for this one, we would basically annotate it Hilt ViewModel, and then we annotate our constructor with @inject. And then that's all we need to change about the ViewModel. So what we're basically saying is that, like, okay, Hilt knows how to create the ViewModel because we've annotated this with the like necessary annotations. So Hilt will generate some code that we don't get to see that creates this ViewModel for us. It's like a ViewModel factory behind the scenes. But now we have what you might sometimes hear referred to as like your dependency graph, is that once you do this, things kind of spiderweb out, right? Like, we've handled the first part, which is, hey, we need to tell Hilt to create this ViewModel. But in order for it to be able to do that, it needs to know how to create the credentials login use case. And question in chat. So sometimes you can't even create the real dependencies like databases, so you need fake dependencies that act like the real thing. This is mocking up, right? I'm not really sure what you mean. Like, yes, so in like a testing scenario, we want to use a fake dependency, but in a production case, I want to be able to create the real dependency, and I'm not sure why I couldn't create it. Maybe what you're thinking of is with Hilt, there's kind of this, Hilt has two concepts for creating dependencies. Let's look at those in the documentation. This might be actually similar to what your question is. Oh, no, I'm not talking about tests yet, but that was a really good point. But you brought up a good segue into an important clarification with how things work in Hilt, which are these two headings on the right. So we see inject interface instances with binds and inject instances with provides. So let's talk about like what that means. So anytime you're supplying an interface, you can use the binds annotation from Hilt. So let's look at their example. Let's break it down. We have an interface called an analytics interface or analytics service, and it has these functions on it. And then we have this concrete instance that has also noticed the @inject. So let's assume whatever this depends on, we've already defined in Hilt. And so Hilt knows how to create this analytics service implementation. So then when we want to create this, we basically use the binds annotation, and we say, you know, for this interface that we're returning, this analytics interface, we put as the parameter the actual implementation we want to create. So anytime you have an interface and there's a sort of one-to-one mapping between the interface and the implementation you want to use the binds method. Where it gets a little more complicated is, well, what if it's not this simple? What if it's not an interface? What if I'm trying to create a retrofit instance? And that's where the provides annotation comes in. Let me go back and let me point something out that actually I think might be helpful. So this analytics module, there's a couple things here. There's the module annotation. A module is a collection of dependencies. Then we have this install in annotation, which, think of this as like the scope. So activity component is kind of like scoping it to the activity. So if I have a new activity and I need an analytics service, it will make a new one for that activity. If I want to have one instance across the whole app, then I would use like a singleton component. There are other scopes, but basically this maps to, well, how long do these dependencies live? Is a way to think about it. And then what I wanted to point out is these are abstract classes. This is an abstract class and an abstract function. And that's basically necessary so that when Hilt does its code generation, it will generate like a subclass that overrides those abstract methods and implements them doing what Hilt needs to do. Now, in the case that Hilt can't automatically figure it out, say a third-party dependency, that's where this provides annotation comes in. And if we look at an example here, like if we're providing a retrofit instance, then we don't need an abstract class. We could just create an object. We use the provides annotation instead. And then because it's not abstract, we have to implement that function body where we then say, here's how to create this. Now this can have its own dependencies if we need it. But yeah, basically the difference between binds and provides is, well, mostly is it an interface? If it's an interface mapped to one single implementation, you could probably use binds. If you're creating something that's like a third party or like an actual instance of something else, like that's where provides would come in. So we'll actually see, I don't know if we'll see both in this project, because we don't really have any retrofit sort of stuff in there yet, but we'll see. Now there is one other thing that I missed in here. Let's go down the docs. So we understood modules. Modules are groups of dependencies. We looked at how we define the creation of those dependencies. And we looked at with the ViewModel, the Hilt ViewModel annotation, how we tell the ViewModel that it needs to consume certain dependencies. There's a little more Hilt setup we need to do. After we add these dependencies, we must define an application class that is annotated with @HiltAndroidApp. And this annotation triggers the code generation, including a base class for your application that serves as the application level dependency container. So this is actually, I guess, a benefit of Hilt over its, I don't know if we want to call it a predecessor, but Dagger was a previous dependency injection solution. And Hilt is basically built on top of Dagger, but removes even more boilerplate that we used to have to make with Dagger. So I guess with Dagger, there was a lot of stuff you had to do in the application class, but for Hilt, we basically just need this one annotation. So actually, let's add that. And why this is interesting is because we don't have an application class yet. So let's make one. Let's put it at the root folder. We'll call it TOA app. And basically, we could just have this extend application. And we don't need to put anything in the class body right now. Maybe one day we'll come back and have other initializations, but that's all we need to do to set up the app. We also, now that we've created our custom application class, we do need to add that to our Android manifest. Otherwise, it's just going to use like a default application. So where we do that is on the application tag of the manifest, we do Android name, and then we can do .toa app. The dot is basically saying root directory, and then TOA app is the class name. So that's cool. Let's see. Once Hilt is set up in your application class, Hilt can provide dependencies to other Android classes that have the Android entry point annotation. So here's an example. Okay, so there are classes that support this. So we use Hilt ViewModel to provide to the ViewModel. We use Android app on the application. And then for all of these, if we want to supply dependencies, we just use the @Android entry point annotation. So I think we will need to add this to our main activity because we're eventually going to use that to create a ViewModel. So, and if you don't add it, I'm pretty sure Hilt will yell at you at some point. But let's put it on our main activity just in case we do need it. Cool. So that's the basics of just adding the Hilt library. So let's go ahead and commit this real quick. And then what we'll do is, well, now that we've had this, we need to talk about creating our dependencies. And as you reuse things throughout the app, this gets faster, because you don't need to the idea is you only define your necessary dependencies once, but we haven't done that for anything yet. So to do that, I think a way I might walk through it is I want to start at the smallest level and then sort of build our graph up from there. And what I mean by that is, well, if we look at login ViewModel, okay, this has one dependency, which is the credentials login use case. That is an interface. Wrong annotation on activity? Aha, good catch. What is it? Android entry point? Great catch, Tim. So I talked about breaking this down. So what I meant by that was, well, sure, login ViewModel has one dependency, which is this credentials login use case, which is an interface. But if we look at our prod credentials login use case as an example, this is what we will use. This has its own dependencies, which are like login repository and token repository. Now, at this point, we don't have any instances of either of these. So this is where I would start. I would start by creating a module and adding the necessary stuff to create one of these repositories. But in order to do that, I need like a concrete instance, which we don't have yet because we don't have any sort of data logic yet. So what I might do is create like I don't know what I would call it, like I kind of want to call it like a demo login repository that is just like provides demo responses for us. Where do I want to put that? I think I'll put it in this same folder. So let's create a demo login repository real quick. Or, well, here's a naming convention that I think will fire up chat. So typically, so this is the login repository, right? And actually something I typically do is repository is what I name my interfaces, and then the classes I suffix with the word service. And this might be controversial, but I like it. So this is a sample login repository that does not interact with any real data source, but allows us to quickly modify return values for testing, manual testing sake. And then, nope, log in. So like here, let's just say return result that success login response. Can I just return like a default thing here? I should be able to. Why is this yelling at me? Token needs a string. Okay, hold on. So let's split this up. We've got like our default token, we've got our default response, and then that's what we can return inside success. It's our default response. Okay. So this is what our demo service does. I am basically going to do the same thing for the token repository. And so I'm copying that documentation. But I'll replace this. This will be token repository. I spelled interact wrong. We fix that over here too. Okay, and basically same thing here. So I guess for store token, we can basically just say like no op. And actually here, let's just return null. So we'll make this compile without failing, but it will just return some default stuff here. Cool. So now that we have this concrete instance, we can get back into the Hilt portion of things. I'm going to go into, at the root level, I have this core folder. I do want to like clean this up, but I'm going to put a new package in here called DI. And let's go over this. So modules I mentioned are like a group of dependencies. And because of the code generation, there's really no hard rule about what should go into what module. I personally like to group them either by feature or maybe by like their type. So what I'm thinking about here is actually like a repository module. And so what we would do here is, so we would have an abstract class repository module. And we need the module annotation. We need to think about the scope. I think for these sorts of classes, I would think that we only need to create them once. I can't imagine a need for this particular thing to have like different use cases, different versions of it. So I think I would just put this in singleton component. Maybe someone in chat has a reason why that's a bad idea, but that's what I think I would do. And so for these, because we're doing a one-to-one mapping between that concrete implementation and our interface, we can do these through the binds method, or the binds annotation. We could say, bind token repository. And more specifically, this will be like, as a parameter, we put the concrete instance we want, demo token service, and then this will, this will return token repository. Cheers, tracks. And we'll do the same thing for the login repository. Demo login service, and this will return login repository. Okay, so that's our repository module. Now, the only other dependency that we are concerned with right now is that use case. So let's create a use case module. Now, for this one, I also think that I can technically use a singleton component, but here is where I think I might have it be like scope to the activity. That each time I launch a new screen, I might want like new use cases. I hope if they have state, it's a state of that that's relevant to the whole app. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. So like the token repository, I could see that being something that like stores information locally, like through preferences. And because I'm going to get and read from preferences every time, it's fine for that service to be a singleton and used around the app. And I think use cases are probably the same, especially because for this credentials one, because the repos are never going to change, the use case should never need to change. But I don't know if I'm worried that if I put singleton component everywhere, that's going to bite me down the line. But you know what, let's go with it now. And I think the benefit is like, then it's created once and it doesn't need to be created again. But that could be a problem if it's created once and it's never used again. I don't know if making it part of the singleton component means it's going to stick around longer than necessary. That could be a concern. Maybe something we can like look into. If we do like a stream on like performance monitoring or something, we could think about that. But actually what's nice is even though our So even though our prod credentials thing, even though this has dependencies, because Hilt knows how to create this and knows how to create this, it means it knows how to create this. So I can still use the binds annotation here. Bind credentials login use case. And have this return credentials login use case. So those are our modules. I think I'm just gonna run a clean build, and I want to make sure this passes, but this might be enough for the Hilt integration. While it's running, let's throw in some documentation. So this module is responsible for defining the creation of any repository dependencies used in the application. This module is responsible for defining the creation of any use case dependencies in the application. Note, if this gets very large, we may want to consider refactoring and making modules feature dependent. Just something to think about. I can see that as this app grows, I may not want a use case module. But I'm not going to refactor that yet. I don't want to over-engineer it. I would rather rearrange modules in the future when it actually comes up. So yeah, if this, get rid of that. I forgot that that was there. So as long as this passes, I'm gonna make a pull request just for this, and then we'll do another one for connecting VM to UI after this. Modules for login dependencies. But as always, now that we're getting started with the stream, before I can even, it failed. Interesting. Oops, okay. A lot going on here. What went wrong here? Okay. I might need to let this finish, and then I can scroll around the terminal and figure out what went wrong. Okay, let's take a look. Let's figure this out. Okay, I'm starting at this line right here. Oh god. Why are you letting me scroll to the right? Is that because it's wrapping text so I don't need to? Okay. So at Hilt components, there's an error missing binding. Prod credentials login use case cannot be provided without an @inject constructor or an @provides annotated method. Ha. So here's an example. So here's what went wrong. It's right here. So I showed when we created the ViewModel in the beginning, we needed to annotate the constructor to the ViewModel with @inject. We need to do the same thing anywhere that we have a constructor of Hilt dependencies. This was I think the only thing I missed there. This was the only dependency. But it does call out that, if we don't want to do that, or if we can't do that, again, because it's not our class, that's where we would need a provides annotated method. But here, we could just annotate with @inject, and I think that should do it for us. And while that's running, what I was getting at is we need to keep going with the stream history file. So and we'll do that by setting up a new thing. Will I do two things? Yeah. So this will be stream 6. Let's call this dependency injection. And we'll update this if they more. In this stream, we implement the Hilt library and set up dependency injection for the login screen. This is October 13th. Let's throw in built docs. That's something that I think will be relevant. I'll add the PRs after the fact. Updating history. Nice. All right, that went pretty quick. Not too bad. We'll get that pull request going, and then we can move on to the next thing. I never tagged any of those to this ticket, but that's fine. Adding to the library. This is for work. Number 49. We'll call this tech debt. We'll put this on the developer experience project. Even though I did work for the login screen with those dependencies, I'll tag it to developer experience. Ooh, interesting. That failed, but that might have been from the old commit. Let's push our code that we've actually changed, and then we'll see how GitHub handles this. Kind of want to wait to see if it finishes before I move on, but I also don't want to spend 10 minutes waiting, so let's interesting. Why did this fail locally? Is that one thing? Let's run it locally because that will be a little faster. And I just want to make sure that this is passing as we expect before I move on to the next screen. Or the next portion of this, which is connecting to the UI, that we have this. And do I have a ticket for that already? Nope, I want to look at the onboarding. That's still in progress, yeah. So this, we'll move that to in progress. We'll do that next. Let's also go back to our dev experience board, and we can talk about Hilt integration, move that to in progress as well. Okay, this failed. Let's see if we can see why. Maybe another issue here. Demo token service cannot be provided without an @inject constructor. Oh, interesting. So this is the same problem as our credentials login use case. We talked about how we needed to add this @inject constructor. I did not put that on the demo classes because I thought even though it was empty that we wouldn't need it, but it seems that Hilt wants it there no matter what, even if it's an empty constructor. That's fine. Let's add that. Interesting. I would have thought that if there was a no-R constructor, that Hilt would just generate a no-R constructor, but I guess that's fine. So hopefully this will pass. Quick plug while we're here. If any of you are not subscribed on YouTube, I'm gonna drop it in chat. Go do that. We are like less than 50 people away from 1,000 subscribers, which is absolutely mind-boggling to me. We just passed 500 500 followers on Twitch this week. Also another huge milestone. I'm not tweeting about it because last time I did, I got distracted and I waited months. But I do have ideas of like some sort of 1,000 subscriber celebration on YouTube when the time comes. But I might be late on that one as well. But I'm very excited for the ideas that I have. It's taken a little bit. Oh, nice, it's running tests. It's a brand new app that doesn't have a ton of code, so a clean build shouldn't take that long. And it looks like if it's running tests, it's definitely working. So let's just commit this and hope for the best. And check the annotations that were missed. Cool. And yeah, as long as this builds locally, I'll move on to Android mascot cosplay. If I had a bug droid costume, I absolutely would. Um, Unfortunately, I don't have one. I should reach out to Google about that. Um, See if they can send that to their hardworking Google developer experts. Um, Always forget to push code. Happens every time. I also might update our danger file to remove this comment because I'm tired of getting emails just from streaming. What about Room? What happened with Room? What did Room do to hurt you? All right, let's talk about the UI part here. Let's do TOA 50, um, login, screen, UI. All right. So, something I know about before we do this. So, login content. So I talked before, I think I did a little bit of this last week, but then I didn't get anywhere with it. Um, for login content, the reason I call this content is because this is basically what is displayed on the login screen. It just consumes the view state and any listeners that it has. I need to build type converters to store a JSON that contains multiple objects or go with foreign keys. Um, my vote, even though it's always more work, is always to go with foreign keys. I love database normalization, but I also understand uh, why you wouldn't. Although I have a YouTube video on uh, room relationships if you want me to send you that so you can learn more on like managing relationships with data in room. I think that's really interesting. Um, but to login content, it's just what's on the screen. So then what I like to do is I like to pull this out into yeah, if you basically search my name, it's not on my channel, it's on the async Android channel. And let me find it. Y'all know I love my alliterations, um so of course it has a name of room relationship recap. This is it. Let's copy. I want the share icon without it playing because you'll be able to hear it. Let's get this. Drop this in chat. Oh, yep, there you go. Nice. Um, yeah. I basically walked through the different ways you can relate data in Room and how to manage that. So where was I? Login content. This is just what appears on the screen. Notice this has nothing to do with the view model, and that's on purpose. This, by having no dependency on the view model, is very testable. I can provide any state and callbacks I want inside of a composed test, which we'll have to look at eventually for this project. Um, but we do need the view model eventually. And so the way I like to do that is putting that in a different composable that I call the login screen. So content is what's on the screen, and screen is more to represent like the screen itself, like the actual container of it, I guess. Yes, this idea is like state hoisting. That's what they call it. Yeah. So here we'll actually consume a login view model. So another way to think about it is like content is entirely like stateless, or in the fact that like it does not maintain any state itself. It just consumes what is to be displayed. And the login screen is where we're actually going to have that sort of state management. So, for example, we're going to put, view state will be view model dot view state dot collect as state. And then now that we have this, now that we've hoisted this out, I guess, now we put in our login content. And So we'll have view state will be view state.value. On email changed, we want to proxy that over to the view model. On password changed, again, proxy that over to the view model. On login clicked, model login clicked. On sign up clicked, view model sign up clicked. So this, well, we could try to write a test for it. That would be really difficult because we'd have to like mock or create a real instance of the login view model for testing sake. To avoid all of that trouble, we added this other composable that this becomes very testable because there's nothing in the there's no Android dependencies here. Yeah, it's really nice. So now that we have this, let's call this inside our activity. So what I actually think we could do for now, because we're not worried about composed navigation, let's get rid of all the template code. And so first we need to get the view model. And how do we do this? So we saw, I put the Hilt composed libraries over here. So I want to talk about this. So let's actually look, there's a couple solutions to this. So if we're not using navigation, I think we can just use this equals view model. The view model function mentioned in the view model section automatically uses the view model that Hilt constructs. I think the reason we would want to add Hilt navigation compose is when we want that to be scoped to the navigation graph. And so I don't know if I want to add that now or if I want to worry about this when we get to navigation. And in fact, maybe then I'm wondering if I can just do the first part of x equals view model. Um, I might need to add another dependency in order to get this. Hold on. Hilt view model integration. So is this... Sorry, hold on. I want to make sure I type this right. Yeah, equals view model. The view model function mentioned in the view model. Aha, here we go. Or for this one, it's for just this specifically, it's lifecycle compose, lifecycle view model compose. Um, so let's add this. I wonder why it's alpha 01. Maybe that's a separate thing, but let's um, got it. So important note here. So this won't do the same thing as, yeah. So that's what I'm wondering if I should just add that, even though I'm not using it yet. I'm wondering if I should just add this instead. Let's do that. But I wonder if then does this require me to put it inside a nav host? Let's find out. Let's ignore this for now. Let's go to our build.gradle file and let's add that dependency. I prefer double quotes. Okay, let's add this. Let's follow the docs and see where we get. So okay, I don't need to be inside of a nav graph. So this is it. Let's see if we can provide this as a default argument to make it even nicer. Okay, I think we can. Yep. So then here we can basically just say login screen. Look at that, our activity got down to under 30 lines. Let's run it and let's see what we can get. While it's running, let's go check on our pull request. Look at passed, nice. So we'll squash that. We'll squash that. We'll go over to developer experience board and we'll move Hilt integration to done.